Lieutenant Colonel. We heard one person with experience in Fallujah saying that this was going to go on forever. And now we've just heard that they pride themselves in these sort of asymmetrical fights where they know they're going to die and face big governments of military.
From their perspective, it's the only path to even possible victory. And because they don't have to look much farther than the Mujahideen in going against the Soviet Union in the 1980s and 90s, or against the Taliban, because they did always die in large numbers, but they were able to outlast the superpowers here. And that's exactly what Hamas is going to try to do. And I'm glad they brought up the Fallujah issue, because that's something that Israel needs to be very, very careful about, that they don't fall into a trap. Because when we went into Fallujah there, we spent 3 full months of sealing off the whole city, doing lots of intelligence preparation, lots of training on our side. And then we went in and methodically operated when we had a good plan. If Israel rushes in too fast, they could end up stumbling, having large numbers of casualties, and maybe not even accomplishing their tactical objectives, in a cost-effective manner. And that's something they have to be very careful of.
So what I hear you saying is that Fallujah, even though it turned out to be so bloody and so horrific and so hard to fight, the trap was broken up in part because we got in with early planning. What you're saying is what it would have looked like if we hadn't even had that, and that was a death chamber.
It absolutely could have been. And look, there were only about 3,000 terrorists in Fallujah when we went in there. And now you're talking minimum 30, 50,000. And depending on how you count things, it could be substantially higher than that. And the terrain is massively bigger than what they had before. So the task is so much more difficult for Israel than what we had. And if they don't take the time to get detailed intelligence first and have a good plan and rehearse it, I'm telling you, they could just rush into failure. And I know people see all these tanks and artillery pieces, and it looks like, man, overwhelming. But once you get into street fighting, all those advantages almost get diminished, because the advantages go to Hamas, who is very well prepared for this and has foreseen this for months.
Hamas has created a humanitarian crisis that is breathtaking. They pinned their own people in, told them not to leave when Israelis were trying to show them a corridor and where they needed to go. Is this a tactic of the evil that walks among them?
I have the greatest empathy and sympathy for the innocent Palestinian civilians that are caught in this, because they truly are between a hammer and a vice. Because you have the Hamas doing everything they can to keep them in place so that their bodies are shields against them, so that they slow down the Israeli drive. But then on the other side, they can't escape, because Israel has blocked the thing off. There's only 24 hours left, or actually less than that now, of fuel for those hospitals. And even wounded people can now start dying because they don't have protection. And we've got to do something to get some help into those people so that they're not suffering anymore. You saw Secretary Blinken been on this big tour here, and so far he didn't get much accomplished in that. And that worries me, especially with Egypt and Saudi Arabia, who are not doing what you're suggesting. And that's a little bit alarming to me.
I do want to get to the hostages. Now we know that there are 199. And that number keeps jumping. So I say that with some caution. For now, that's what we know. And they're being held by the serial killers, Hamas. That number is up from the previous estimate of 150. Last night, the White House promised it would work to get Americans out. Here's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
It is a dynamic situation. We cannot say that we have a fixed location for every American, or even that we know every American who is being held. So we are working, having sent hostage experts to Israel with our Israeli counterparts on hostage recovery options. We are also working with third countries on every possible avenue to secure their release. And I won't go further than that, other than to say that for President Biden, he has no higher priority than to get those Americans back.
Here's the president on the hostages.
Is getting the American hostages back safely among your highest priorities now?
Of course it is, but it's hard to make distinctions. The most important thing is ending this brutality and to hold those who committed it accountable.
My team and I talked. We didn't know what in the world he was talking about. It's hard to make those distinctions. Do you happen to know?
I don't. Actually, I've seen that clip already, and I'm not certain what he's talking about. I thought maybe he was talking about it's difficult to make distinctions between Hamas and just innocent Palestinian men, but that doesn't seem to fit in the context. So I'm not real clear what he means. But Harris, I got to tell you, I mean, we got to look at this honestly, and the chances of getting any of these hostages back in the near term is just almost nil. because as some of the footage Fox has shown just right before our segment here, the Hamas is willing to slaughter innocent people without a second of compassion or thought. So they will definitely not hesitate to kill these hostages if people come in. And the problem is, any hostage negotiation, any hostage rescue requires great intelligence to know where they are, to have a good plan to go in to get them. And right now, we don't know where any of these people are, and they're probably moving them around to keep that from happening.
Colonel Davis, you said 30 to 50,000 Hamas terrorists. There were 3,000 in Fallujah. That's 10 to even more times the number. How do you deal with that? And do you even think that number could be low?
I'm virtually certain it's low, because that's like formal Hamas fighters. But look, when someone's coming in and attacking your city and whatnot, any man in Palestine who has an AK-47 is going to try to defend his people, and he'll be immediately considered an enemy combatant as soon as he does that. We saw that in Afghanistan during some of my deployments, and it'll just be substantially larger here. That's why I'm so adamant on telling people, look, don't have expectations that Israel's going to go in heavy and punish the terrorist. But it's going to be a long, bloody, brutal situation, which could drag on for months and be inconclusive.